By any measure, housing affordability in Australia is a national disgrace. Young people are locked out of the market. As the former Prime Minister said, the former Liberal Prime Minister, number 2 of 3 in this 8-year-old government, said, well, get rich parents. I mean, that's the way to get into the housing market, isn't it? Get rich parents. They'll give you a deposit. There are 4 measures in this budget. This legislation introduces one of them, but there are actually 4 measures in this budget. The government claims, I quote, will help people into home ownership. Well, it sounds nice, and each of them, I have to say, sound nice in isolation. They've given them kind of cool-sounding names to make it seem like they're doing something. And on the face of it, individual measures in isolation, it's hard to disagree with most of them. They're kind of apple pie. But let's focus on the one in this bill first. It's splashed all over the paper. They're going to help single parents to get into the housing market. Well, that sounds good. Wouldn't we love to help single parents get into the housing market? The bill, though, this measure will help, so they claim, even if they deliver the promise in the budget, 10,000 single parents over the next 4 years to get into the housing market. There are 1 million single parents in this country, and the government got their headline by saying, oh, we'll shut people up about housing. It's a bit of a problem. We'll shut them up. We'll get a little bit of money here to help 10,000 people. I was raised by a single mum. My dad died when I was 4. We were incredibly lucky that Dad had life insurance so Mum could pay off the mortgage and we could have a house to live in. She basically had no money, no savings, lived pretty hand-to-mouth, casual jobs. We were looked after. So I know what it's like to be raised by a single mum and how important having a roof over your head is. I know the fact that by the time she moved out 20 years later, she'd never afforded maintenance, the house was falling down, the clean-out was a nightmare, as many sons and daughters of single parents know. But the devil also is in the detail that in reality, this is not about helping poor, deserving single mums. The only people who might benefit, the 10,000 lucky winners from the lottery, the Liberal lottery, the 10,000 of the 1 million single parents who might benefit, basically are going to have to be earning between about $85,000 and $125,000. So let's be really clear, behind the nice spin words, this is not about helping poor single parents into housing. This is a marketing exercise which will do almost nothing for the real housing crisis in this country. The other 3 measures in the budget, first home loan guarantee, first home super saver scheme, home builder, that's another conversation. Apparently if you criticise home builder for renovating people's bathrooms, you're against tradies. I mean, what nonsense. The Rudd government spent a few $1 billion during the last financial crisis and left a legacy of 20,000 homes. 20,000 homes that are still there today, an asset that people are still living in. This mob pouring hundreds of millions, billions, into renovating people's private dwellings while doing nothing for the most deserving. But the problem with these 4 measures is that together they all further stimulate demand in an overheated market. They pour petrol on the fire that is the housing market in the big capital cities, particularly in this country. They help a few people, but as usual with this mob, they sacrifice the many. As one stakeholder said, you don't make housing more affordable by making it more expensive. But you have to give them an award for shameless hypocrisy. I mean, they're doing well in that regard. Because most of the time when they get challenged on housing, they say, well, that's a state issue, it's up to the states. We're just the Commonwealth government, housing's not our problem, it's a state issue. And yet when it suits them politically to have a few marketing slogans, like in this budget, they're spending $3.3 billion on what they then say on another day is actually a state issue. But all of these measures add to demand. Not one of the government's measures actually do anything to add to supply, because that would be social housing. That might actually help the most needy in society, and that's not what they're on about. As the National Shelter said, they summarised the government's budget, it puts home ownership out of reach for the many while benefiting the few, because all of the government's measures just bring forward demand. They do nothing to provide a pipeline of housing construction over 2 to 5 years. I contrast that with Labor's Australian Housing Future Fund, which the Leader of the Opposition, the Labor leader, announced in the budget reply to invest in new housing. This $10 billion commitment would create jobs, not pour petrol on housing prices. It'd create lasting legacy assets, because that's what Labor governments do, is build things for the future and leave a legacy. They'd build new homes particularly for people to live in and target them at the people who will never get a crack at the housing market. That's what government should be doing. National Shelter, I couldn't summarise it better. They said they're conducting lotteries for deposit programs, ensuring the great Ponzi scheme of housing continues, where the benefits accrue to existing owners, not the hopeful ones, said their executive officer. Also said, we've called on the Commonwealth to show leadership and establish the incentives to provide their part, do their part. But instead, they spruik the market while they're interfering with it and refuse to lift their share of investment in social and affordable housing, so desperately needed. Governments have a responsibility to play a role where markets fail, and housing markets have failed to produce housing for those in greatest need. Another opportunity has now been ignored. Their comment on Labor's policy, a $10 billion future fund which forecasts the delivery of 20,000 new social dwellings and 10,000 more affordable dwellings over 5 years under a Labor government, they said, well, such a fund would create a pipeline of investment that can be built on to secure a steady growth in social and affordable housing. It adds to supply in a predictable way, creating jobs for tradies, but targeted at the most needy who actually need this. Instead of pumping up demand and pushing the house prices further out of reach, the budget reply speech builds supply, creates jobs and makes homes to ease pressure on households and markets. The forecast spending on veterans' housing, crisis and transitional housing, the repair of social housing was welcomed. Quote, at least one major party recognises that social and affordable housing is critical economic infrastructure which enables tenants to participate, learn and address health and other issues. It's also critical for women's economic security. So really, those points are fundamentally important. For this government that call themselves economic managers, these geniuses over there, in their 8th year of government, heading to the next election thinking people should give them 11 years when they've built nothing. There's no legacy, $1 trillion of debt, $100 billion of new spending, nothing to show for it. Just more petrol on the fire of the housing market, putting it further out of reach and, funnily enough, advantaging people who already own houses. But it could be worse, I suppose, if, looking at the second reading amendment, we're lucky that the government hasn't listened to its own nuttier backbenchers and their self-promoting idea to let people spend their superannuation on pushing up the cost of housing further. Super for housing. Put more petrol on the fire of demand. You don't make housing more affordable by making it more expensive. The only thing that would do is put the vacuum cleaner into your superannuation account and suck it into the pocket of the guy selling the house. That's what every mainstream economist said. It's what Joe Hockey said. That's why he knocked this stupid idea out years ago. But we've still got Liberal backbenchers pushing the government to add a fifth element to their policy of pushing up housing prices. That's the practical economic impact of the government's policies. I mean, they can dress it up in whatever language they like, but that's the true impact. Push up the cost of housing further, make it harder for people to get in the housing market. They're not deterred. Of course, the member for Goldstein was out this morning bagging his own government for not picking up his own silly idea. But it's pretty clever of him, because at least it makes it look like he believes in something. He's got a degree of consistency there. But it is incredibly hypocritical, of course, because people like him are actively opposing the ability for superannuation funds to invest in affordable housing. Like, if you're serious about affordable housing, we've got trillions of dollars of funds, many of them looking for stable asset classes in a world with cash awash but not enough investment opportunities. And you've got the member for Goldstein and his weird mates on the government backbench saying, well, we couldn't let these funds go into social and affordable housing and increase supply. All we want to do is use taxpayers' money, or in this case with their $1 trillion of debt, we want to go and borrow money and run up the national debt and put it into little teeny tiny schemes that will help a few people while pushing up the cost of housing for everyone else. How on earth can they claim to be good economic managers? Even before these schemes came into place and we saw the latest house price rises, Australian housing market was the third most unaffordable in the world. Bet my bottom dollar by the time they've finished, if they had their way, they'll get to #1 most unaffordable housing market in the world. So sure, We're not going to vote. We're not going to fall into the little wedgie trap. I think, as Catherine Murphy said, or one of the media reporters, the gas-fired power station, it's a giant atomic wedgie on Labor. We're not going to fall into the trap of voting against a little measure by itself might, if delivered, help 10,000 of the 1 million single parents in Australia over 4 years getting the housing market. We're not going to do that. But we are going to call out the practical impact of your economic agenda. Cut wages for ordinary workers, raise taxes on the people at the lower to average end, cut taxes permanently for the highest income earners in Australia, and push up the cost of housing to better advantage people who already own a house. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.